Today we're going to be talking about the prodigal son, but also the prodigal's father. Today on Deep Dive episode 30.
Josh, do you still like our intro music?
I'm fine with it.
I'm okay with it, too.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any other podcast use it. So I like it. It's simple. It's short. It's got that good bass to it.
Yeah.
Like
It's one of those things where I'm kind of neutral towards it. I like it.
Yeah, it's all right.
I don't not like it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it serves its purpose. I haven't really put much thought into, how much I like it or would miss it if it were changed, whatever. So
It's a tool, and it's just part of what we do.
yeah.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, when we first started, we were given a choice between three, and this was the best of the three.
Yep.
Yeah.
We may change later. Who knows?
Yeah.
We're apt to change things.
Yep.
But here we are, Deep Dive 30.
Yeah, episode 30.
Number 30.
Yeah.
Man, they go by quick, don't they?
Yep.
Although we've done many more podcasts together.
Yeah.
Done a bunch.
Episode
podcasts.
30 of the Deep Dive version of our
Yes,
podcast.
Right. And talking about Prodigal Son. Father's Day last week.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I wasn't here, and I'll tell you, this is just the truth about what happened
Okay.
for me. Okay, I'll do a regular introduction of. It's all about Destry.
Mhm.
It seems that's
That's
what
our
we do.
first segment.
That's our
Usually
first
is,
set. I don't know. Why.
the life of Destry.
I don't know why. I don't know why. But it seems like there's always something I can report on. So
Right.
So I get up Sunday morning, and yeah, I'm tired, but it's not unusual for me to be tired. But it was the end of a 10-day photo shoot, on-site photo shoot in Milton, Florida, about 30 miles away.
Yeah.
And I was still going to go to church because why should I not go?
Right.
Doesn't matter. I'm certainly glad that Jesus said, I'm a little tired. I can't get up on that cross today. I just can't make it. There's no excuse not to go if I'm available. Even if I'm not available, no excuse. Anyway, so I get dressed, do everything I normally do, feed the kitties, get out of the house. I drive into church, and I get here early, like I normally do. I pull in, back up, sitting there, about to go inside, and I'm dozing like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm falling asleep. Just that little bit of time that I sat there, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to go in and represent in a positive way because I'm just everything fatigued.
Yeah.
Everything, I was just fatigued. So
It was a long, exhausting week of every day in the summer heat for you.
Yeah, and I'm not. Again, no excuses. I'm just telling you what I think happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I envisioned in my head, gosh, I could go inside and in the past I haven't represented well whenever I'm in this situation. Or I can go over to my wife's house, which sounds funny.
Right.
She lives with her mother, and she takes care of her mother. We live 3 miles apart. Or I can go over to my wife's house and just crawl in bed next to her and fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that sounds really good. That sounds so good.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. Full clothes. I just got on the bed, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, I can't make it." So I just fell asleep, and I have no idea how long I stayed there.
Yeah.
But I needed it, man. I needed that sleep. So that's what I did. So I wasn't here for Father's Day to hear any of the sermon, unfortunately. But I'm guessing it was about fathers.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah,
it was about. And we crowned a Father of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
They got a wrestling belt. Think of a gold wrestling belt. That's what the plaque is. And I guess they get some prizes and things like that. So
yeah.
And honestly, I don't know who our Father's Day Father of the Year was, but we crown one every year. Crown a Mother's Day or Mother.
Yeah,
Mother
it's something
Year
that in the weeks, for those listeners who might not go here or might not know how it works, it's usually this funny little contest that our church does every year for the Mother's Day and Father's Day, and in the weeks leading up to it, on the bulletin there's a little thing where people can write in who they think the Father of the Year should be,
Right.
and whoever gets the most votes wins.
Right. It's been fun to do
I don't think
that.
there's an official criteria of things you have to meet.
No,
but yeah,
no, not at
it's
all.
just however many names get written in.
Right. And I think, who knows? It has to do highly emotional. Maybe a father went through a trying time as a father that year and handled it well. Or same with mother. Listen, all mothers and fathers could be mother and father of the year, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah.
So it's
just a fun little thing to do.
Yep, absolutely, sure is. So how was it, Josh? How was the sermon, or more specifically, did you find it something worthy of talking about? Of course.
We're good. It's a short episode today.
Forget about it. Of course, Pastor Godfrey did a good job of it, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. To me, I always kind of feel bad for the speaker on regular occurring holidays or whatever, because like Father's Day comes once a year, so every Father's Day it's expected the sermon's going to be something about fathers. So how do you do a Father's Day sermon every single year for your entire for your entire career as a pastor or preacher or whatever? Same with Mother's Day and all the different holidays. It's like you're expected to preach something about this.
Right.
So how do you make it new? How do you make it something that people haven't heard
some type of
50 million times already?
Right. Yeah.
And so, but anyway, he talked about the parable in Luke chapter 15, the parable of the prodigal son, and he didn't talk about. Well, I mean, he did talk about the son, and because it is the parable of the prodigal son, but he focused primarily on the attitude of the father. And I think it was an interesting perspective that I figured we could dig into a little bit here, because it tells us a couple things about God and God's relationship, God's attitude towards us, who often find ourselves in the position of the prodigal son.
Okay, gotcha.
And a lot of sermons, they talk about the nature of the son, and how he left and what his attitude was. A lot of times people talk about the older brother who was jealous when he came back and got all the attention, and so looking at it purely from the perspective of the father was pretty interesting.
Okay.
But so it's in Luke chapter 15, and whenever we go into a topic, I never like to go straight to that verse. I always like to look at the context behind it,
right?
and what Jesus was talking, or whoever was doing the talking. What's being talked about? What's the context? What's the events surrounding this that led up to this being a topic of conversation or whatever?
Because those chapters and verses are man put. They're put there by man.
Right. Yeah, and we've mentioned that a couple times. Is that when we say Luke chapter 15, that chapter number isn't part of the original documents. We've put all that in there, the verse numbers, the chapter numbers, and stuff, to make it to make Scripture more easily navigated.
Right.
But what sort of comes with that or develops, without our intent, is we think that they're isolated, or subconsciously we think that all the verses, all the chapters, are like isolated things,
right?
That we can just kind of pull out and build something on that little component, and that sometimes leads to some false conclusions and some dangerous ideas, and so that's why we always like to stress the importance of the context and what's going on around that verse or that group of verses. And this is no different, because Jesus had been interacting with the Pharisees for a couple chapters now, and the Pharisees had been really keeping their eye on Jesus because he was doing some suspicious things, like he was healing people on the Sabbath day, and in their minds that was a violation of the law, because I guess you're technically working on the Sabbath,
right.
And so Jesus had to address those types of things, and so he starts talking to the Pharisees in parables, and there's 3 parables in Luke chapter 15 that he explains, and the first two, it has to do. Well, the first one has to do with the lost sheep, and if you're familiar with Scripture at all, or have any experience with being in church, whatever, you've most likely heard the parable of the lost sheep, where there's 99 sheep, one goes astray, and so the shepherd leaves the 99 temporarily and goes and searches for that other sheep and brings it back into the fold. Yeah. That was one of the parables. The other one was there was a woman who lost a certain amount of money, and she spent a lot of her time searching through her house and eventually found the money, recovered it, and in both cases, both the lost sheep and the lost money, once it was found, the people, spread that news to their friends. Everyone rejoiced, like, hey, it's great you found the lost sheep. Hey, it's great you found the lost money, all that kind of stuff. And so there was these two parables of something inanimate being lost, and the owner of that inanimate thing searching for it, finding it, and bringing it back. But then we get to the prodigal son, and it's not something inanimate. It's something that left of its own choice. It was the son who decided, you know what, I'm going to go to my dad, and I'm going to ask for my inheritance early. Because this wasn't even the firstborn son. It was the younger son, and he didn't like being at dad's house or whatever, and for whatever reason he decided, you know what, I want to get out of here. And so he went to his dad and said, I know it's not time, you're not dead yet, it's not time for me to get my inheritance, but I'd like it early. So can you give me what my inheritance would be, and I'm going to get out of here and do my own thing. And so the father acquiesced and gave him, which, by the way, would have been like a third of everything that the father had, because usually the firstborn son gets a double portion of everything that gets split up, because he's the next head of household, and everyone else gets the rest. So,
gotcha. Right.
So he does that. The son is given his inheritance, and he goes off into far country. And so we'll pick it up here in verse 11. It's always hard to read around my microphone because it always blocks my view. But he said, a certain man had two sons. This is Luke 15, starting in verse 11. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks of that swine that the swine did eat, and no man gave to him. So here's a situation. He takes his inheritance and he leaves, and it says that he went to a far off country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. So he was just interested in the party life. He spent all the money. He had a lot of money. He spent it all, and he just had a good time partying. And then at the end, he had nothing left. Didn't have any friends, didn't have any money, didn't have anything like that. And he found himself looking for a job. And it says that he joined himself to a citizen of that country. So remember, we're exploring a parable here, and Jesus is using elements of this parable to remind the Pharisees of their own history, of their own tendency, the tendencies of Israel, what they've done throughout the history of their development. And so he's not just talking about this random son, he's talking about Israel. He's talking, right. And depending on who the reader is, this has different applications. For me personally as a Christian, it can represent my attitude towards God or my relationship with God. And so as Jesus is talking to these Pharisees, he reminds them, you guys had an inheritance, and you wandered away, and you squandered that inheritance with citizens of a far-off country. And then when we think about Israel's history, there's a lot of parallels there, because all throughout the Old Testament, Israel was delivered from Egypt. They entered the Promised Land. God gave them a land to inherit. That was their inheritance. And what did they do with that land? They ended up squandering that land. They ended up following after the practices and the religion and the things of the Canaanites, the pagan people in the land they dwelled, and both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, when it split after King Solomon, the northern kingdom ended up becoming desolate because the Assyrians ended up taking them over and spreading them out. Right. The southern kingdom ended up desolate because the Babylonians came and took them over and started taking people to Babylon. And the entire history of Israel is kind of the history of the prodigal son, because they took their inheritance, they squandered it, and they found themselves in the midst of a land that was in famine. They found themselves wanting.
Right. And
they had no choice but to be subservient to other countries. The Babylonians, eventually the Persians, and as the kingdoms progressed, they were always in that situation of being subservient. Well, the son here, picking it up in verse 17, says, "When he came to himself, he said, 'How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare? I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in thy sight I am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry."
Wow.
So, ending there in verse 24, there's a lot of things that we can look back on and gain a little bit of insight into the character and the nature of God, right? Because especially when you look at God and his actions towards Israel, all throughout the Old Testament, Israel constantly wandered and squandered anything that God gave them with the nations around them. They're constantly following after idolatry, to the point where in Ezekiel's standing there next to the river, and he looks over the horizon and he sees a vision of God's throne with God on it, moving across the land, appearing on the horizon and just running past him towards Babylon. And he finds out the reason that had happened was the presence of God was in the temple back in Jerusalem, but his fellow Israelites had turned the temple into a center of worship for idols, for pagan idols. They had set up idols in the actual temple and were worshiping them there, and so the presence of God can't coexist there, and so it left and headed east. And all throughout the next 24 chapters of Ezekiel, God through Ezekiel and different metaphors that Ezekiel was told to live out in front of his people, God reminded them over and over again about how deep they had fallen to idolatry, into paganism, and they had taken the things that God had given them and squandered them with the Canaanites and with the Amorites and the pagan people that God had told them, drive these people out of the land. These people, they're enemies of me. They're enemies of you. They don't have your best interests at heart. They're going to turn your hearts away from me. You need to drive them away. And Israel never did. In fact, they did the opposite. They joined with them. And they spent their inheritance in riotous living like the prodigal son did. And they found themselves having squandered all of their inheritance, they found themselves destitute, either in subservience to the Syrians, subservience to the Babylonians, whatever. And God spent the rest of those chapters in Ezekiel reminding them of all this, of just how often they failed, and said, judgment is going to come because of this. Because one thing we have to remember about God is there are several attributes of God that all have to exist simultaneously. God is love. We know that one. God's also just. God's also holy. God's also, a lot of things. And he doesn't turn one off and turn another on. They all have to exist simultaneously. And so that picture of God that we get in Ezekiel is a picture of a just God. You've sinned, you've fallen short, and there's a wage for that sin. And we have that encapsulated in that verse in Romans, right? The wages of sin is death. Well, the entire the death of the nation of Israel was a direct result of their conscious pursuit of paganism all throughout the Old Testament. And so God points that out, and he details just how extensive that judgment's going to be. It's going to be famine. You're going to be, taken from your homes. Your sons and daughters are going to be taken. Your families are going to be split up. Just all kinds of stuff is going to happen to them, because that's the nature of the people they chose to serve. And so that judgment had to come. The consequences of their sin had to come. But then we look at this parable of the prodigal, and Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and reminding them of their history. And we see the opposite side of that coin. And we even get a little bit of insight into that in the book of Ezekiel too. But here it said, verse 22, the father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, kill the fatted calf, all that kind of stuff. And they began to be merry. And now he turns to the elder son, because the elder son came, this is verse 25, came and drew nigh to the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what the things meant. And he said to him, thy brother is come, thy father hath killed the fatted calf, because he hath received him safe and sound. And he was angry and would not go in, therefore came out his father and entreated him. And he answering said to his father, lo, these many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this thy son was come, which hath devoured thy living with harlots, and hath killed for him the fatted calf. Thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto his son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. And so when you look at that in the perspective of Israel, you see sort of two sides of the same coin with God. One is he's just, and the consequences of our sin still have to happen. And we see this in our lives when we choose to do something contrary to what God wants. Oftentimes that comes with a consequence. It could just be something that affects us. It could be something that affects our loved ones. But we can always choose our sin, but we can't choose our consequences. Yeah. And oftentimes those consequences are outside of our control. It's something that we have to live through. But that's different than forgiveness.
Right.
Because
yes, that's right.
Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that the consequences go away, but that the lapse in the relationship between you and the person you transgressed, that relationship is restored. And that's what's happening here with the prodigal son and his father. So the entire time the prodigal son was gone, that hurt the father. The father didn't want his son to do that. It hurt the father that the son was hurt because he squandered all his wealth and found himself in destitution. And when the son came home, the father's attitude towards the son never changed. It was an attitude of love, right, yeah. And he welcomed him back when he came and celebrated when he came. And that was confusing to the older brother at first because, well, you've never celebrated me.
Yes.
I've been here the whole time. How come I'm not getting parties like this? And the father had to clarify, there's a distinction here. Yes, you've been here. You've been here the whole time. You've never left. You've been loyal. You've been obedient. You've been a good son. Everything that I have is going to become yours, and you've never lost that. However, the celebration is because I've always loved you, and I've always loved the younger son, and it hurt me when that younger son left, and I want to celebrate when he comes back. Sure, he's lost his inheritance. He doesn't get that back because he already got it and he squandered it.
That's
so
the earthly consequences.
Yeah, he still has to deal with the consequences of that. But I'm still really happy that he came back. This was something where the father couldn't really pursue, because those first two parables, the shepherd pursued after the sheep, the woman pursued after the money she lost. Here, it's not an inanimate object that just got lost or an animal that just wandered off. It was a son that made a conscious decision to leave, and the father honored that conscious decision, even though it hurt the father. But the entire time that son was gone, the father's attitude and his love toward him never changed. And when he came back, there was celebration as a result of it, even though there was still consequence. And it shows two sides of God's character. Yes, he's just. And, like we see in the Old Testament, as an example from Ezekiel, Israel, you've sinned, and here's the punishment that's going to come about because of that decision you've made. But he even tells Israel back then, one day you're going to be restored, and it's going to be great. And I'm still going to be here. I'm not the one leaving you. You're the one leaving me. And one day you are going to come back. And just like the prodigal son, or the father of the prodigal son, there's celebration there because the love was there the entire time. And it's really interesting how God works that way with us too.
Putting ourselves as the son that left, or the country that Israel. That is what we do. We have. There's a certain thing called backslidden. Whatever that is, and. We go away, and we may still love our Father, but we've decided to pursue other interests, or act in another way, knowing it's wrong. That doesn't.
There's always the appeal of the far-off country.
Absolutely, right. And I like what you said, that God didn't move, we moved. Or He moved. God is always there. Jesus is always where He says He is. We're the ones that change perspective. And if we look at stories like this and put ourselves, I think our tendency is to say, man, you know what, that guy doesn't deserve anything. He left we have this judgment about it. But if we start looking at it like the parable, like it was intended, and putting ourselves in that situation, I can tell you right now, at least one particular situation that I felt cheated because the guy that I was working with at Sam's Club was late all the time. He sometimes didn't even show up, and whenever he didn't show up, the rest of the crew had to make up for what he didn't do that day. Yet they put him on the fast track to management, and that bothered the rest of us. That bothered the rest of us, and I never really. There certainly is some differences there in this parable, but I'm just looking at it from that point of view, being the son that was
a lot, man. You're bad at your job. Let's promote you. Promote you to management.
I couldn't believe it. I was so young. I was in college, and I was like, why? We're here all the time. We're supposed to be da-da-da-da-da. And that's, as I got older, that never left me. I got older, I was thinking, well, I guess they were just trying to encourage him to come in, to have something more to deal with. But I don't know what it was. But but I felt like that the closest perspective to being the brother that didn't leave. I'm here the whole time, man. I'm here. Putting him on the fast track to management don't make any sense to me, and they never explained it to us. They never said anything to us about it. So anyway, I put myself in the situation of Israel and all them because that's what we do, man. I have for 20 years I had a idol of racing bikes. That was my deal, man. You know what I mean? Man, if I put so much energy into studying the Bible and becoming closer to Jesus than I ever did racing bikes, I would be a lot closer to him, I'm sure.
Years ago, I was convicted, and it's a really weird way of being convicted. But in my career, I'm always reading the building codes,
right?
And
So it's such easy and fulfilling reading.
Yeah,
Josh,
it's really interesting to nerds like me. But I got convicted once because I came to realization, like, do I read and study the Bible as much as I read and study the Florida Building Code? Yeah, because I often get hired to be an expert witness when it comes to building failures or construction failures or whatever, specifically because of building code issues.
Right.
And I teach building codes at University of West Florida as an adjunct in their engineering department. And I'm always just like deeply involved in issues relating to the building code. And I got convicted once because, like, that's really not that important in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, it's it's the a component of my career, but that career is not going to last forever. Am I putting as much time and effort into studying Scripture as I am the Florida Building Code? And that was convicting because the answer was no.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, and I used to joke. I used to lead a teen Bible study at a church I used to go to, and it was sort of an interim position because the prior youth pastor had left and they hadn't hired another one yet. And I remember a teenager, one of the guys came up to me and said, well, the previous guy, he used to do this, and we used to do this on Wednesday nights and all that. And I just leveled him, like, look, I'm an engineer. I never went to training to be a youth pastor or nothing like that. So you're going to be doing the same Bible study I am. I'm going to be using, my sermon illustrations or whatever are probably going to come from the building code.
Yeah, right. That's
and they
what
did,
I know.
I'm like, this is what I know. This is kind of the I'm going to try to make it as interesting as I can for you. But, like, I can't promise to be a textbook youth pastor.
Right, sure. Well, I think all of our listeners and viewers, they have a building code, or they have a bike race career, something that perhaps is more important to them, and it may be very productive. I don't know. Whatever it is for you, one thing I can say with certainty is that if we put him first, all that other stuff will be better.
Right.
All that other stuff will be stronger, and our desire will change. The closer we get to him, the more our desires change. And I think that's part of wisdom also, is realizing that we're not trying to talk God into anything. We're trying to bring our will in line with his, because that's the best overall for our families, for our loved ones, for ourselves.
Yeah.
He's not going to point you in the direction that's not productive and not.
And the prodigal son is a really interesting study in that too, because oftentimes we get the idea that we're forcing our will into alignment with God's, and that's not always the case. It's kind of like my relationship with my wife. If I love my wife, I end up wanting to do things for her that might be inconvenient for me, but I don't really take that into consideration because I just naturally want to do this for her. It's not like I'm trying to bend my will, to be compliant with hers. And it's the same way with God. The closer we become to him, the more we, study his word, the more we pray and seek his counsel and develop that relationship. Our natural inclination will be that our will is more in alignment with his. It's not like, man, I have to do this. No, It's like, this is what I want to do. And it just so happens to be, this is what God also wants, because you're walking in parallel.
Yeah. Boy, what a great place to walk.
Yeah, because the son did experience the same thing, because his first inclination was to leave and go pursue his own interests.
Yes, right.
But then once he found out the emptiness of that, his mind naturally changes. Like, it's actually better to just be a servant in my dad's house than do all this stuff. I'm just going to go and like, I don't deserve to be a son, but I'm just going to go and see if I can work for my dad. And it was his own decision that he made.
Yeah,
it wasn't like, man, I really want to keep being out here. This sucks. I have to go and work for my. It wasn't bending his will to his father's. That was his natural inclination because, that's just where he was.
It's a good story. I hope that our viewers and listeners will take from this several things. But one is that the stories, the parables that we know, even as Sunday school stories, if we delve into them a little bit deeper, like we do here in the deep dive, they're so rich in lessons and so rich in what God is telling us. That I hope that we won't overlook some of these things that we've heard before and dive deeper in them, and that's what we do here on the deep dive, and that's what our pleasure is, and hopefully that's what people are learning and enjoying about what we do here every Thursday. Josh, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Chris, thanks for being here. We appreciate you very much. And we'll be back next week, and we'll do the same thing.
All righty.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. We love y'all. Thank you very much for listening and viewing.